Hey, welcome to another edition of Leadership Lessons. I'm Bob Sanborn. Welcome, class. Hey, we're going to try to do something a little bit different tonight. One of our speakers sort of got mixed up and wasn't able to get here. And so I've asked Amy Birkhead, who is on staff here at UHD, to go ahead and interview me. And then, time allowing, another law student who works for us, or a law fellow who works for us at Children at Risk, will potentially join in and ask some of the questions as well. But Amy, thanks for being the hard interviewer.
Thanks for having me.
Ready to go?
Yes, I'm ready.
So I am ready for the hard questions on leadership.
Okay, most of these questions are incredibly difficult, so do not feel bad if they're...
You've roughed them up a little bit,
yes.
right? Yeah. So.
I'm going to start with the question that you ask all of your guests every week, which is, if you wrote a book on leadership,
wow,
what would the first 5 or 6 chapters look like?
You know, when I started asking that question a number of weeks ago, I probably didn't have an answer myself. But as time has gone by, it's made me think a little bit more about it. And one of the things that really stands out for me, if I'm going to put 6 or 7 sort of steps in there, is the idea of hiring the right staff. And one of the books that we're reading is Good to Great, and it talks about the idea of getting the right people on the bus. And that's real important, and that's real important to me as well, making sure that you have the best possible staff, a very smart staff, very capable staff. It makes life much easier. I think another part of that, though, is creating a culture that staff wants to be a part of. So having a culture that people are happy in, having a culture where people feel the passion of being within sort of that nonprofit culture, that's very important. Also, relationships, and some of the guests on the show have talked about relationships as being important, and the ability to have an atmosphere where you can develop relationships internally, but there's also a real focus on developing relationships externally. Collaboration, et cetera, is very important. I think innovation, sort of a focus on innovation, new ideas. Another part of that, I have a couple more. Mm-hmm. And teamwork, again, that whole collaborative thing. Mm-hmm. And then finally, you want to have a focus on the proper attitude, sort of a positive attitude. I think and that fits in with culture, that fits in with having the right people on the bus, but you always look for that. And another sort of thing, I said finally, but this is the real finally, I think, is having a vision. You want to have a vision of where your organization is and a vision of where you want to go. Mm-hmm. And I think it becomes much easier to attract people to the organization and to be successful when you have that roadmap of where you want to go.
I want to get back to that, the end road, so remind me to do that. But
okay.
The thing that struck me whenever you answered that was getting the right people on board. Every guest that I've listened to spoke to that. How are you doing that? Or how have you done it?
Yeah, so when I first went to Children at Risk, I thought that this might be sort of an area of challenge for us. I mean, it was an organization with not a lot of money. It was relatively small. And so I sort of had to think outside of the box. What can I do to really attract top-notch people? And so the strategy that we decided was to go with sort of inexperienced people who are willing to work for practically nothing. That usually ended up being people straight out of college, maybe living with their parents. But the people who had that passion, people who wanted to really work hard, people who really shared that vision of what could happen with children. And so that's sort of what we looked specifically for that in young people and in people who wanted to work and promised them no money practically, but that they would have a lot of fun, and that was part of being a part of the culture. And that works for a while, right? And then what happens is that there are people that emerge from that are obvious superstars, right? These are people that are fantastic, and then you try to reward them accordingly because you don't want them going elsewhere. But that whole idea, though, of recruiting sort of at that early level, people who have the passion, people who really want to work hard, to this day, we still find lots of superstars by doing it that way.
And those people don't leave. right?
Well, I mean, sometimes they do. I'll give you a story. We have, there's a young woman who came to work at Children at Risk. Her name was Diana Sarsuelo. And I probably have about 5 or 6 Diana type stories of people like Diana. And Diana started as an intern at Children at Risk after graduating from college. Then we quickly hired her on half-time because we saw she was pretty good. And then when we saw someone else might hire her full-time at practically no money, we hired her before they could. And she slowly worked her way up the ranks and became the deputy director of Children at Risk. But then she left to go to Harvard. So she went to Harvard to get her master's degree at the Kennedy School. And then she's been working at the White House, for the Obama White House.
Oh, okay.
But Diana called me, maybe a month ago, and she said, I'm ready to come back to Houston. Will you have me at Children at Risk? And so here's someone who just sort of grew and went away, and now she's coming back. And we have stories of, people who, there was a young woman, Caroline Holcomb. Again, she was an intern, worked her way up, and recently, about a year or so ago, left to go to Princeton for her PhD, full ride. And so those are great stories to be able to tell, and we're very happy when that happens. We had a fundraiser who was fantastic, and she left to go to work at MD Anderson. She should have stayed at Children at Risk, yes, but it was a great opportunity
What awful
for her.
people that are leaving for Harvard and Princeton.
Exactly,
So
right?
unfortunate for you.
Exactly.
The other thing I wanted to get back to was what you brought up about the end goal. Have you ever reached your end goal? And if so, how does it evolve? When you have a vision for what your nonprofit can be. We'd be really set if we did this.
Yeah.
Have you ever achieved that goal? And if so, how do those evolve?
Yeah. I think you try to always achieve those goals, right? I remember, I came from a family where no one went to college, right? And so just the idea of me going to college was sort of like, that's a pretty big dream, right? And so I went to college, and you go to college, you hit your goal, right? I went to college, but then you think, well, maybe I should get a master's degree. Maybe I should get a doctorate. And so I was able, and I think all along my life it's been that way. And I think in work it's the same sort of thing. So when I came to Children at Risk, I remember we did this 5-year plan my first year, and sort of creating this vision, and the whole board was on board with this vision. And we wrote up a little thing that's tagged onto the back page of the strategic plan, which was like a vision for Children at Risk in 5 years. And it was, and I think we might have said, it was a 5-year plan, but the vision was like Children at Risk in 20 years. And in it we said, well, we'll have 25 staff, and we'll have offices in Dallas and Houston, and we'll have we'll have a law center. And it was like dreaming big for Children at Risk at the time. But we've done all those things. So we have all those things now, and we've surpassed those things. And so if you want to dream big, I encourage it, because you can reach those goals, and then you quickly set more goals. When you reach your goals, you just sort of set higher goals.
Okay. Yeah. So you just set more.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you see what you can do, and then you try to do more.
And then you stair step from there.
Exactly.
Really cool. You mentioned college. Where did you go to high school?
So I went to 5 different high schools. 5 different high schools. So I grew up mostly in Puerto Rico. So from first grade through the beginning part of my freshman year of high school, I was in Puerto Rico. And I was, in 9th grade, I was at Rafael del Valle High School.
Mm-hmm. I know that one.
You know that one? In Aguadilla, Puerto Rico. And so I was there, and then we left to go to the States, and I went through a series of different high schools, and then finally, at one point, I decided to live with my father, and he was in Florida. Mm-hmm. And I'm making a long story short, but I ended up graduating from a high school in Tampa, Chamberlain High School. And it was from there that I started thinking about going to college. And I had teachers who basically said, Bobby, you need to go to college. You need to think about going to college. And so I applied to a couple of schools in Florida, because I was in Florida at the time. And the one that was farthest away from home that seemed fun was Florida State. Yep. And so that's where I went for my undergraduate work.
Does working in the nonprofit sector start to enter your head at this time, or is it later on, college, high school?
What entered in my head at that time was how fantastic college was. it just seemed like this little utopia. Here I was sort of a bookworm, and the idea that there could be a whole place where everyone cared about learning and wanted to learn new things, and the fact that I could sign up, and if I was a full-time student, I could take as many classes as I wanted, that seemed incredible to me. And the fact that you could take classes and go home and take a nap and go back to class, these were all fantastic deals that I had no idea about. And so what entered my mind was, how can I stick with this? And so I began to think about, how do I work at colleges? And so for most of my career, I was in academia and I worked at universities. And I think it was all getting back to, how do you replicate that sort of wonderful time in your life? And how do you help other kids have that sort of wonderful time? And it was only after a while that I started thinking about the nonprofit area in terms of, how do you make sure that every child has that same opportunity that I had.
So that's how you start to get into the nonprofit sector.
Exactly.
But how did you get into your current position?
So I was working at a foundation here in Houston. At some point, I was working at a college up in Massachusetts, and I took a job in Oklahoma to be closer because my wife was commuting back and forth to Houston. And that still wasn't good enough. And so I started thinking, well, maybe I'll work in Houston. I'll look for an academic job, or I'll look for a nonprofit job. And I got a job running an education focused on public education, and a foundation focused on public education. And I was there for a couple of years, and then the board at Children at Risk came to see me and said, we're looking for a new executive director. Would you be interested? I said no, and then about 5 months later, they came back and said, well, we really want to grow. We really want to do great things. And so I interviewed with them at the time and ended up taking the job, and that was about 8 years ago.
Why do you think they sought you out?
Well, there was someone on the board that knew me. Mm-hmm. I think they liked the idea that I had an academic background. Children at Risk works with a lot of research, a lot of data. Mm-hmm. I think I sort of sold them on this idea of what Children at Risk could be as well. I think that was a big part of it. So,
cool.
Yeah.
I'm parlaying into what you think that your leadership style is today, and if that's any different from when you started, or if it's
I think leadership style changes all the time. I mean, I think there's some basics that you stick with, but I would hope that you continue to learn. Like, I don't know if I said this last week when I was talking with Emily Whitehurst, but the idea that every single woman leader that I've interviewed on this program has talked about the idea of listening, and how no male leader talks about the idea of listening being an important component. And I think about that, and I reflect, and I think, well, maybe we should be listening a little bit more. I mean, it's such an important component, and so I want to change to be able to be a better listener.
That's all the result of doing these segments.
Yeah, just these segments. Cool. Yeah. And frankly, if I'm visiting another leader and I see them doing some certain things, I think, well, that seems very effective. And mm-hmm. So I think you always want to try to do what's most effective.
What do you think that you do that's most effective, or how would you give a hard answer to what your leadership style is? Because it's written here. I have to ask you that.
I think what people would say is the most effective thing that I do. If we were to round up people that know me, they say I have a knack for hiring really good people. And I think growing really good people and creating a staff of dedicated, hardworking people, I think that's been really something that's been terrific. I think another thing that's very obvious and that I take a lot of pride in is the ability to generate visibility for an organization. So creating good partnerships with the media so that you can be very visible has been good. And I think the whole idea of collaboration, I think I and the folks at Children at Risk, I think we bend over backwards to try to collaborate, to be friends with other organizations. And those are all three things that are very reflective of my leadership style.
I want to talk more about collaboration. Mm-hmm. It's important, everyone knows that. But how does an organization achieve that very effectively?
I think people need to see that you mean it. I think, when you're out there in the nonprofit world, and I'm sure it's true in any other field, you sort of figure out very quickly who plays well with others, right? There are some people who you meet and you figure out, they're not in it for collaboration. They're in it to see what they can get out of it. And everyone gets that. Everyone sees who those people are. And so you could be talking to other people and you mention that and you see the eyebrow go up and you know who they're thinking about. So I think it's being authentic in your idea of collaboration, and I think it's really wanting to help. I can't tell you, Amy, how many people have sat in a chair in my office from other organizations that we offer to help, and they never take you up on it.
Why?
Yeah, I don't understand.
Why
I don't understand what that is, but. And then others do take you up on it, and they can't believe that you're helping.
Authenticity is probably a part of that.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
That is interesting. If I'm looking for a career in a nonprofit sector, what should I be looking forward to? And, just what should I be looking forward to?
I think when I look for people to work for in the nonprofit sector, what you always look for is what sort of previous experience do you have? So that if you're looking for a job in the nonprofit sector, the most important thing that you can have is experience. And that might be internship or volunteer experience, summer school experience, something that you did sort of part-time. I think all of those things are interesting. And to be able to talk about that experience, I think is also very important. So we have a little, you're not supposed to do this on camera.
What are you talking about? Something over here?
So
Nothing.
I think I have a radio show, Amy. I do a radio show every Monday afternoon, and the producer always tells me, "Don't say when things go wrong, Bob. Don't say when things go wrong." It's always sort of a.
And you do.
And of course I do, because that's what I do. So where was I?
So what should people be looking forward to in working? Like, what will they benefit from? And then also on the converse of that, what should people be wary of?
I think having that experience, being able to interview well, practicing their interviews as much as possible, I think is a very important thing. But I think probably the most important thing is going to be experience. And I'm sure I'm not answering your question exactly, but Cynthia's here. Cynthia Akatugba.
Yes,
yeah, look at that.
Good
How did
job.
I get that? So
It's only been 10 weeks.
is a law fellow at Children at Risk. And when we were talking about Amy interviewing me, Cynthia's like, oh, I want to go. I want to be part of this interview. And so Amy and I said, of course, Cynthia could be part of the interview. And so Cynthia is sort of like, sending in the recruits to help Amy out. Though Amy is doing a fantastic job.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Someone is here that is more qualified, so I'm
No, I didn't say that.
Not at all.
So do you have a big question for us, Cynthia, to start off?
Well, I think one of my big questions for you, especially since I've observed you working at Children at Risk, is how do you manage and balance, your family life? And I know you love football and you love all of those things. So how do you balance your family and work? But I know you're also in meetings all day. You do things like this. How does that work?
Yeah. Obviously family and children are very, very important to me. And I think throughout my whole career, it's, always having this discussion with my wife, and she's happy to tell me when I'm overscheduling myself, when I'm, spending too many evenings away. And so just being able to sort of have constant communication. When my daughter was, I remember going to a leadership workshop when my daughter was maybe 3 or 4 years old. And she's now graduated from college and New York City doing improv. And I remember at this leadership workshop, someone saying, well, what would you like to do with your life? And I remember writing down, I want to spend a lot more time with my daughter. And I remember feeling at that point that I wasn't spending enough time with her. And my next position, my wife commuted back and forth, and so I was practically a single dad, and so my daughter Ginny was with me all the time. And I remember she would come to the college, like after she left school, she would come and spend time with me at the college. And I developed this sort of special bond with my daughter that I think a lot of people don't get with their kids. And I think a lot of men don't get with their daughters or sons. And so I think that has sort of affected me in many ways, including sort of working to make sure I have this sort of really good balance, making sure I spend enough time. So I schedule time for my family. If I need to leave early, I leave early. And as you know, Cynthia, people at Children at Risk, if they need to leave early, they need to leave early. But there's this culture of hard work as well. And people don't let you leave early if you're just like skedaddling to have fun. I mean, there's sort of people hold you to it, and they want your nose to the grindstone. But we also know that families are very important. And I think, a lot of the moms who work at Children at Risk, don't work on Fridays and leave early when they need to. That's an important thing.
Okay, so do you think that maybe the nonprofit world offers that flexibility as opposed to maybe the corporate world? Or maybe
I don't think, I really don't think it has anything to do with nonprofit and corporate. I think it has to do with leadership. I think that because if you've worked at Children at Risk, we're not working any less than anyone else, right? Absolutely. And I think when people interview sometimes in nonprofits, they think, well, maybe this job is going to be easier. I mean, have you heard that before? People think this whole idea that, it's a nonprofit. Can it be that hard?
I always think it's going to be harder.
It is harder. I think it is harder. Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't get that. Indeed, it is harder. But it doesn't mean that it's not supposed to be fun or that you don't have to this balance of family life.
So I guess we can see what's on the Twitter feed and take a question from you.
Okay.
We were talking a little bit about leadership style before, so this will be perfect. Go ahead.
Which one? So how does Children at Risk come into play with Dr. Sanborn's personal mission and vision? So this is from Marta.
Wow. Well, I think that's a hard question. Marta, you always have great questions. You're always really good with the questions. I think Children at Risk in many ways is very reflective of my personal mission, what I want Children at Risk to be. I think a lot of my personality shows up at Children at Risk. But I do also think that can be an interesting dynamic for an organization. I think that as you grow larger, people necessarily don't want to be a part of Bob's show, right? I think people want their own deal going on. And so that has to be part of what happens with a leader as well, is understanding that this is about Children at Risk. It's not about Bob. And we're doing everything possible for Children at Risk. And so a lot of it's going to be naturally reflective of me. But you have to understand that, not everyone wants me to get just sort of all this glory. It's about doing it for the children, right?
So how do you balance, I suppose, ownership, having your staff have ownership of projects and ideas within the organization, and the hedgehog doctrine? I know that's something you guys have discussed in class. So how do you balance that? And also your mission and your own personal belief of what the organization should focus on?
That's a lot of questions, Cynthia.
Sorry.
So pick one of those.
Well, I think, balancing your vision and then the vision of the great people that you bring into the organization.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good. So as a leader, it has to be your vision, right? I mean, it's very important. You want to have a shared vision. You want to incorporate as many ideas from everyone who works for you as possible, but you have to own it. I mean, there may be a great idea for a vision who someone else in the organization has, but if I want to be happy and if I'm the CEO, if I'm the main leader, it has to be something that I want to do, that I'm a part of. And sometimes I think that's hard for other people. And it's okay for it to be hard and for them to maybe have to go someplace else if it doesn't fit. But in the end, I report to a board. The board hires the CEO. If they don't believe in my vision, they will replace me, believe me. And no one is irreplaceable. You can do all sorts of great things, but I've been around the block too many times to understand that you could be fantastic, but if the board doesn't like what's happening, they're happy to replace the CEO. A good board will. Yeah.
Right. So let's look at another question. So Sandra says, how do you deal with difficult employees?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you always do when you want to have the right people on the bus is you take a long time hiring. So we interviewed a candidate the other day, and she was on her third interview, and she thought this was about it. And then someone else in the interview said, well, I had 5 before they hired me. So we do a lot of interviews before we ever hire someone. And I think it gives us a chance to figure out who they really are and whether they fit the culture. Conversely, the thought is that if someone is really not working out, you cut them pretty quickly. So slow to hire, fast to fire. And I think that I've had plenty of people who've worked for me over a lifetime that you can tell when someone has the tools and they just need guidance or they need time. And sometimes people just don't have the tools and are not going to make it. And when you see that, instead of hoping things get better, you just need to cut. And I would have to say that every single time that I've cut, it's been the right decision. I mean, you look back on it and you feel like it's been the right thing, and everyone around would say it's the right thing because you cut people who are not contributing to the organization. And that's hard, and it's hard in the nonprofit sector because we have this big, huge heart, right? I mean, we're there to make life better. And so then we end up cutting people. Does that stun you at all, Amy? Or what are your
That
thoughts?
you guys have big hearts? Not at all.
That we fire people? Does that stun you?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
But that does fit perfectly with this question I wanted to ask, which is that one of the bigger mistakes that you see nonprofits make, either with hiring and firing, or are there others? Or what are some of the bigger mistakes you think other nonprofits have made?
I think, a big one is not letting people go when they need to be let go. I think another big mistake is I see a lot of CEOs that are completely underperforming within their nonprofits. And so a big mistake is the board. Just like if there's an employee that I'm not cutting who's not good, board's not cutting a CEO soon enough or quickly enough to turn around an organization. I think that's another big mistake that we see. I think another huge mistake is to think that fundraising will take care of itself. I see a lot of organizations that have gone under because there's not enough focus on how do we raise money, how do we make sure that there's enough money. So those are a couple of sort of big mistakes that I see nonprofits making quite a bit. I see a lot of nonprofits, Amy, that are completely underperforming. I mean, that have great missions, that have a good name, maybe a good reputation, maybe part of a national group, and that you would think these are a fantastic group. This is a fantastic group, and then you meet the leadership and you realize, wow, they're not doing the job they need to be doing.
And talk to me about how important the board is and what a good board looks like.
The board is very important. When you get together with a bunch of CEOs of nonprofits, one of the things, if they talk about their problems, usually it's personnel and board. The board can be a great asset, but it could also, it's full of a lot of personalities, and they're volunteers, and and they control a lot of what happens in the organization. So boards can be invaluable when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to contacts, when it comes to access to other people in the community, strategic planning. And so if you use your board for those things, it can be good. I think it's wrong when I see a nonprofit CEO sort of cater to their board, like, I'll do whatever you want. Because really the CEO, the leader of the nonprofit, needs to be a colleague of the board members. They need, my board, I tease them, I work with them. I'm happy to push back. They're my bosses, but I'm happy to push back if I feel they're wrong. And in the end, they just have to evaluate me on, within that whole scheme of things, is this the right guy that we have? But that's the right way to have your board. And I think many times there are boards that aren't doing things like fundraising, that aren't helping out very much, and that are just sort of bringing real small politics to an organization. And that's when boards become ineffective.
Sounds fun.
You've mentioned fundraising twice, and so I guess talk a little bit more about just this aspect of nonprofits, which I think a lot of people who go into nonprofits, you're just so excited about this good thing you want to do for the world, but you don't think about, oh, I have to raise money to do it. So how do you combine the fundraising piece and the advocacy piece, or whatever your mission is, and bring that together in a way, so you don't end up with two different organizations?
Yeah. Well, I think everyone in the organization needs to understand that for this organization to survive, raising money is a big part of what we do. And I think it isn't ideal, Cynthia, right? That we're out there trying to change the world, and at the same time, we're asking you to give us a little bit of money. It's not a perfect, it doesn't seem like a perfect match. But it is the match that we have. It's what we have to deal with, and so we have to be really good at fundraising if we're going to be able to grow our organization. If we're going to be able to do the things that are necessary to make our organization effective. So part of the measure of effectiveness of a CEO, of a leader, is going to be, are they raising a lot of money? And I can tell you that probably boards, when they hire a CEO, care about that almost more than anything. Is this CEO going to be a good fundraiser? And I think, we talked about, why did our board, the Children at Risk board, hire me? I think they saw stars in their eyes and they thought, this guy is a good fundraiser, because I had a record of good fundraising. And I think that was probably, and I should have mentioned that earlier, but that's probably what they cared about, probably more than anything.
Wow.
Is that a skill that, I guess, as an aspiring nonprofit leader, is that a skill that you should really devote part of your education to developing, or you think
being a good fundraiser is all about being able to develop relationships. I think if you can develop relationships and are not afraid to put that into the idea that when you have a good relationship with someone, you can ask them for money. I think that's important. It's not like I meet you and 5 minutes later I'm asking you for money. It's about, I meet you and I figure out what you're like, and why do you like children, and why are you talking to me, and what do you care about the future of children. And maybe the third time I meet you, I figure out how you're going to be able to help the organization. And maybe you could dwindle that down to the second time. Maybe you're figuring out some things about how someone could volunteer. But it's really all about developing a relationship and having a good staff. At an organization like Children at Risk, it's having a good staff who can help you with the research and help set up the meetings and do all the work necessary behind the scenes to make sure you get to that point where you can ask for a little bit of money.
So I think we can take another question. Harry's asking, Dr. Sanborn, what was your major contribution as a professor at Rice University to the student body?
Wow, isn't that? So at Rice, I taught political science, but I also was a dean. So I was associate dean of student affairs, and I went to Rice originally to create the Career Center. So I was the founder of the Career Center at Rice University. Probably my major contribution. What an interesting question. That was Harry? Yeah, we'll have to make a note of that, Harry. So, I was very involved in creating some of the orientation programs that happen at Rice. And so I think today there are a lot of big traditions at Rice that were created at the time that I was there. And so probably some of those, the idea of walking through the Sally Port when you matriculated at Rice, and some things that people don't know about. But these are all some of the major contributions that I had at Rice. I think I was a part of the group at Rice that made Rice from a strong regional university to more of a national university. And so that's something I'm real proud of. So,
Can you name some nonprofits, specifically 3 nonprofits that are doing really great things in the community, or that are utilizing any of the skills that you're talking about?
So when I think about the best nonprofits in Houston, it's all about leadership, right? It's all who have the great leaders. And there's a professor here at UHD, Adolfo Santos. Did you ever know Dr. Santos?
I don't know.
So he's not here any longer. He's left to be the dean of a college in Georgia. But he created this program, this master's program in nonprofit management. And Dr. Santos came to me and he said, Bob, we need to create this program. Can you help me with this? And I said, sure. And so he said, why don't you be the chair of this advisory board, and we'll find the best nonprofit CEOs. And the first one that I called was Brian Green. And Brian Green's the head of the food bank. And I think Brian is one of the best CEOs. He's grown the food bank Here's an example that Brian would not tell anyone, and it's very little. But I remember going to a meeting at the old food bank before they moved to their magnificent new building. And we walked into the break room, and there were donuts. And I said, "Are these donuts that people donated to the food bank?" And he was like, "Oh, we never eat anything that's donated. As a matter of fact, if a volunteer takes something that was donated, we immediately fire them as a volunteer." So the idea that they would separate and be so committed to separating anything that was donated by someone for someone hungry and that someone else would get it, it was just this level of integrity that he was very passionate about. That was impressive to me. But I think you can have a lot of integrity and still not know how to run an organization, and he knows how to run an organization as well. So I think the food bank and Brian Green, I think neighborhood centers, Angela Blanchard, who's over there, I think they do a really good job. I think Carol Shattuck, who runs the Collaborative for Children, those are all sort of very well run and very secure organizations.
Great. What do you see for the future for those? Any of those, or just in general in Houston for nonprofits?
Well, we have a lot of nonprofits in Houston, and I think anytime that someone has a good idea, they want to start a nonprofit. I think when we met everyone who's taking this class and we went around the room, I think more than half said, "Yeah, I want to start my own nonprofit," and I think that's fine. I think there's probably more room, and you're able to do more if you're a good person and you go to a great nonprofit and you contribute to that nonprofit. But I think there's going to continue to be a lot of nonprofits, and I think there's going to be a few great nonprofits in Houston. And I think I hope there's more than a few great nonprofits, but I think that's sort of what we have now, and that's probably, those great ones may change depending upon leadership. But I think the percentage of nonprofits that are great is small.
And you spoke to that earlier when you said we're looking for experience when we're hiring, right?
Yeah.
And all of your students want to start their own. So talk to me about the skill of working in the community and having the skills that it takes to actually be hired.
Yeah, and that experience can be a little bit of experience too, and that helps. The idea, the internship experience and so forth. But I think that we always look for someone who has, when I look at a resume, I look to see where people went to school. I look to see what sort of interesting things they have going on their resume. So, Cynthia, maybe she studied abroad in Norway, and I think, oh, this is sort of interesting, right? And things like, or someone did Habitat for Humanity, in Jordan, or someone decided to work on an Indian reservation. The things that people do, even for short periods of time. Someone who does improv, those make for a more interesting person, I think. And so I look for that. I think the other thing that I found is that when you see someone who's worked their way through college many times, they bring a little something extra as well. And I would not say that most of the staff has worked their way through college at Children at Risk, but you definitely see a difference in those that have. It's sort of like it's less entitled. It's like, I'm happy to have this work, and I really want to change things for kids like me, and it makes a difference too.
And you spoke to that in the beginning too,
right.
With our first question, which
right.
is hire people for free, right?
Right.
I'm sorry,
That's
I
right.
cut you off.
Oh,
That's
no
right.
problem. But going back, you said that there are lots of just people who want to start nonprofits. Do you worry perhaps that maybe a lot of talents, people who would go into government service or maybe going into nonprofit work instead? And how does that work? I mean, for the job you do, you work with the policy changes and things like that.
So do I worry about a delusion of talent?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
I mean, just because they're working in the nonprofit.
I don't. I mean, that's not something that's crossed my mind, Cynthia. I think, I do think sometimes we look for positions and we don't find enough people that we like, but inevitably we do find someone, right? And And when we don't find someone, we tend to reflect back on ourselves. Have we truly articulated in this job description what it's going to be like? Have we talked enough about the culture? I remember rewriting a job description a couple years ago and saying, well, I'm going to say that you need a sense of humor. I'm going to say that, things that you have to work hard, but you need, and when we put that in, I can't tell you how many people immediately said, oh, I noticed that you had a sense of humor in there. I really like that. And so sometimes it's just a matter of sort of reframing what you're looking for. And sometimes it's a matter of patience. There's sort of this ebb and flow of resumes. When you post something, right away you get a lot of resumes, and then it goes down, and then maybe there's some more come in. And sometimes right at the end, sometimes right at the beginning you get some good people, sometimes right at the end you get some good people as well. So
I think Monica's got a really great question.
Good. What does Monica have to say?
How much time is typically spent creating regional publications such as Growing Up in Houston?
Oh, that's a great question, Monica. I saw that before we started taping. So Growing Up in Houston will come out, the newest edition will come out next October, and we're planning for it right now.
But for those who don't know what Growing Up in Houston is.
So Growing Up in Houston, very good, Amy, thank you. So Growing Up in Houston is a big, thick book that we put out every other year with data, everything from infant mortality rates in Houston to dropout rates in Houston. So it's 130 indicators. This is the status of our children. So we start with that now, sort of looking at the concept. So right now we're debating internally, should we move from from growing up in Houston to growing up in Texas? Or should we stick with the Growing Up in Houston, or should the Growing Up in Houston book be mainly policy and put all the data points online? So these are things that we're struggling with right now. And then we'll start collecting the data probably starting in the spring. And then in the summer when we have 25 interns, they'll be working on it, and then it'll come out in October.
So the timeline is almost a full year.
Yeah, almost a full year to do it. And we've purposely put it in alternate years. In Texas, we have a legislative session alternate years. So whenever there's a legislative session, we're not doing a book. And whenever there's not a legislative session, we're doing a book. So
how long do the smaller publications take? I know Growing Up in Houston is the big one.
That's the biggest one we do. We do a lot of research in the summer with our interns, and then we do a lot of editing in the fall, and then by the end of the fall we publish it. So it's still a long, sort of a 6 to 8 months type of thing. So it takes a little bit longer. So keep those tweets coming in, guys, with questions. This is your time to ask me really tough questions. And so we expect you to, in the next 15 minutes, to send me some good tweeted questions. What do we have, guys?
So how does your outreach affect your nonprofit? Is it effective? This is from Nicole.
From Nicole Amaya. All right, Nicole. So, for us, outreach or visibility is very, very important. And so we're not necessarily a grassroots organization. So we're not necessarily going out and speaking to a lot of community groups unless they want sort of the status of children or what's happening in human trafficking. But the idea of being visible and being in the media, and that's part of our outreach, is making sure our relationship with the Houston Chronicle and with Univision and Fox 26 and Channel 2, making sure that those are the Dallas Morning News, making sure that those are all good relationships, because that really, in a sense, is our best form of outreach, is getting us in the media. So sometimes, and Cynthia, you may have heard me say this, that I could be speaking to a group of 50 people, but if Univision comes in the room and wants to interview me, I will leave for an interview with Univision. I'll make it seem seamless, right? But I'll go interview with Univision because I know that night, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people that will be hearing me. And believe me, the press care about those things, because when you drop stuff to be with them, then they'll come back time and time again. So it's a good thing.
That's great. I think there's another great question from Amy Rogers.
So what does Amy have to say?
She's asked, she says your staff consists mostly of women.
That's true.
Uh-huh.
We do have a guy, besides me, one other guy.
Do you find that women are more drawn to a career in nonprofit? And if so, why?
So we have right today as we speak, we have 6 staff in our Dallas office, and we have about 25 staff in our Houston office. And in Houston, in Dallas, no guys, 6 women. In Houston, we have 1 lawyer who's a guy, a part-time guy who does some of our financial stuff, and then me, and then the rest are women.
Wow.
I think when we interview, when we get resumes, it's a lot of women. When we see guys, there are fewer guys that are applying for jobs. So yes, maybe as a rule, the field attracts more women. But by its very nature, when you have 500, so on average we get about 500 resumes for every position we post. And if 475 of those resumes are women, you're going to hire more women, because if you pick the best person every time, the odds are with you that it's going to be a woman. And I think maybe it presents its own challenges, but I get sort of angry when people say, "Oh, how is it working with all those women?" Because what I find is that these are young, sometimes not so young, always professional, hardworking women who really care about this mission. And we wouldn't be where we are without all those women who work for Children at Risk, and who really strive to make a big difference.
Do you have any ideas on why you have more female applicants?
I wonder if for men in our society, they're expected to make a lot more money. They're supposed to be ambitious, and maybe being in the nonprofit world is not as ambitious as being a lawyer or a banker or someone in the oil and gas field. When I go to national conferences with children's advocacy groups, it's a lot of women, a few guys, and they're usually the CEOs, which is telling, maybe, in a bad way. But it's just the field of working with children, I guess, many men would maybe frown upon. But I can tell you that now, I'm not a guy who looks like you want to tease in public, but I think that I've never had any sort of feedback from other guys like, "Oh, you work for a children's organization." I've never ever heard that, actually.
Right.
So yeah.
Has it changed your leadership style, do you think, knowing that most of your staff are women?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that earlier. I don't know that it must have, though, Cynthia, but I can't point to how it has. I've had some women, I've had guys who've worked for me, like at universities, right? And what guys would always say is that, "Yeah, you're a great boss. You're very sensitive, but we know you're the boss." And I think sometimes when you have all women, they're like, maybe what a guy would not think is being gruff, a woman might think is a little gruff or short, So if a woman is like, "Well, so I think sometimes you're too short," my answer to that is, well, you really have to get used to that. That's how I am. And that's maybe a little insensitive in and of itself for me to say that, but I think that's sort of how I've reacted, and maybe over time I say less of that, saying, "Yeah, I'm sorry, but that's how I am," So.
So let's see. Do you donate your own salary back to Children at Risk?
Wow. Do I donate? Who said that? Who said that?
So that's from Nicole.
Nicole asking if I donate.
Getting personal.
So Nicole, what I do is I donate. You do know that, I think Nicole knows this, because I donate everything that I get from UHD, my whole salary as a teacher, I donate it to Children at Risk. But my salary from Children at Risk, I donate a part of that back to the organization, but not most of it, I can tell you that. I have to live, and so I have to pay bills. So I don't donate my whole salary back. But Nicole gets that. That comes from me donating. I know Nicole has heard me say I've donated my UHD salary to Children at Risk. So.
What do you think sustains you to continue?
Wow. I really like what I do. And 2 things. I like all the people that I'm working with. I like that I hired all of those people. Mm-hmm. It's sort of nice. And you hire people sometimes who you don't like, right? That happens sometimes. You like them when you hire them, and then it turns out you don't like them. But I think the most important thing for me, though, is I like that we're making a change. I like that at Children at Risk, we have one board member who says, I love being part of Children at Risk because you guys are kick-ass. And I think it's, we're really going to Austin and we're making policy changes. We're writing legislation. We're changing laws. We have a lot of influence in the state of Texas. And that feels really good. I made a speech one time, and half jokingly, I said, I wake up every morning and I wonder two things. I wonder if I'm going to be in the paper or on the news that day, and which I like. And I wonder, am I going to do my most to help children? And so those are things that, and the being part of the media is only half funny. I mean, I really do want to make sure that the message is out there. Yeah. And I don't mind being that spokesperson, but I do want to make sure that we're helping kids.
I want to follow that up with, have you ever experienced a serious challenge? Have you ever hit a brick wall and thought, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing?
I think a lot. Yeah, I think you do a lot. I think you have bad days, right? There are days that happen that are bad days, and you wonder, but I have way more good days than bad days. And but there are things that happen, and sometimes they're with board members, though that hasn't happened in a long time. Sometimes they're with staff members, which happens all the time. And sometimes they're with things that are outside of your control. Mm-hmm. I have some friends who worked really hard to pass a piece of legislation that it was very simple, which it was for kids, which was when school buses are stopped at schools, that they turn themselves off. They don't idle. When they idle, it produces all this pollution, right. And it doesn't make it harder to start or anything. They just like to idle, And so the law that was written was just turn off the school bus, and it passed through the state legislature, through the Senate, and then the governor vetoed it. And what a bad day that guy had, right? I mean, here you've worked really hard, and I could see working really hard on a piece of legislation, and you think it sailed through, and then the governor vetoes something that seems sort of stupid, right? So things like that also can give you a bad day.
Right. Cynthia, I don't know if you know, but every segment has the second page of your questions are the fun questions.
Yes, I'm excited about these.
So we're getting to the fun stuff now.
Are we ready for fun questions?
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
we are.
Ask away.
What's your favorite restaurant in Houston?
Wow. I should know these off the top of my head because I ask these all the time, right?
Yeah. In all fairness, you were fully prepared for this question.
Yeah. So right now, my favorite, and it's been for a while, my favorite restaurant is Mockingbird Bistro. And Mockingbird Bistro is like this little restaurant with a great chef. It's sort of near the River Oaks Shopping Center, sort of in one of the little neighborhoods, not River Oaks, but another little neighborhood there. And I go there a lot to sit at the bar with friends. I'll go there for lunch. And I love that when I walk in there, they're all like, hey, Dr. Bob, hey, Dr. Sanborn. They know me, and it's fantastic food. So that's my favorite restaurant.
Great. You're kind of a guest. What's your favorite restaurant in Houston?
Oh, very good. You're kind of a guest, Cynthia.
I just turn it on me. I think my favorite restaurant right now is, wow, there's so many. I still love Original Nymphas on Navigation.
Yeah,
and so as
sure.
a teacher, when I was teaching, I spent a lot of time there just, relieving stress, we'll say that.
They have a great patio there, too.
Yeah, it's a great patio.
And your favorite? Because you're sort of a guest, too.
I have, you know what we love right now is this little corner right here at Congress in Maine. So they're building out Okra Charity Bar and Batanga and the new pastry chef, which is all tequila drinks.
Tequila drinks, yeah.
And we have a lot of friends that hang out there and work there. Goro and Gun is a
you like that place?
Ramen fusion place. Yeah. So
I've not been to any of those places.
Oh, cool.
I know.
Let's
I need to go there
anytime.
Okay.
We spend a lot of times because we can kind of.
You can walk over there.
Yeah, I can walk from work. No, we have a lot of friends that work and hang out there, so we can walk into any of those places and be amongst friends and stuff. So I really love that.
Okay.
Back to you.
Yes. Okay.
What's your favorite hidden secret venue? Is there a place that's kind of unknown?
Yeah, I talked about this last week with Emily. I really love the lawn of the Manil. So my wife and I, we go and have picnics there. So that's a favorite place. I love the Rothko Chapel. And then another secret place is I live on a little park called Cherryhurst Park, which is not too far away from the Manil as well. And that's a great little, I walk my dog around the park, and it's a great little park as well.
Right. That Cherryhurst Park is that Richmond and Dunleavy there?
No, Cherryhurst Park is Mandel and Missouri and right around, sort of behind Hugo's, DeMarco's, back in there, between Westheimer and Fairview.
Nice. That is a nice park.
Yeah, it's a nice little park. Do you have another fun question for me?
Fun question. Who's your idol, past and present?
Yeah. So, the person that I used to love to read stories about when I was growing up was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I think as a leader, what really appealed to me about him was that here's a guy, and growing up, I didn't even know he was in a wheelchair, right? I'd sort of see him sitting down all the time in pictures, but, so you add that on top of this guy who becomes the president when we're in the midst of this Great Depression and just everything is going wrong, and that here is this guy who is able to turn it all around for America. And so I've always loved, and I've had jobs where you come in where things are a disaster and you build it up. And so I love the idea of being able to do that. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt would be the person that's my idol.
That's a great answer.
Great. And who would play you in a movie?
Ooh, this is good.
So it's easy when I say this on the radio show because people don't know what I look like, but I always say sort of maybe like a beefy Russell Crowe. So maybe like in Les Miserables, sort of. He's got the beard going on and stuff. So
it's a great actor.
Great.
Yeah.
And aesthetics, sure.
Yeah. So he's looked better in his life than he does these days, but as have I. Very good. Hey, thank you guys very much for interviewing me today. And hopefully you guys in the class have gotten a little bit from this. Thank you so much for all your tweets. And I know next time we're going to have another great guest for you, another leader from Houston. We'll see you next time on Leadership Lessons.